Perfect.
Alrighty. Mike, do you want to kick off?
Are you ready to start, Randy?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Holden, and welcome to our breakout session on building a more resilient and adaptive workforce through micro-credentialing. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Chief Economist at the Business Council of Alberta, and I'm joined by James. Maybe I'll stop and let James introduce himself before we continue on.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And thank you to Randy and all the organizers at Ambrose for, putting this together and inviting us. Truly a pleasure to be online. It's very surreal because, I've attended 3 or 4 of these in your building. So very different, but I'm excited to be here today. James Thangaraj, I'm the general manager of a Bow Valley College venture called Pivot Ed. And what Pivot Ed is really doing is using micro-credentials to get people jobs. That's in a nutshell. I'll come to a bit more of a description when I go through my slides. But for now, we're just here to talk to you about micro-credentials and how we can all work together and help each other out going forward. Thank you.
Thanks. And so what we're going to do with this session is James and I are going to give about a 10 to 15 minute long presentation just to set the stage for our work and our thinking about micro-credentialing, about what it means and what it could do, and from my perspective, what the value is to the business community through our membership. And then we can open it up for a broader discussion. And I unfortunately need to start my presentation with an apology, and that is that through circumstances beyond my control, I ended up getting double booked for a major member session with the Business Council of Alberta members. And so I unfortunately have to duck off a lot earlier than I would otherwise like to have. So I apologize very much for that. But so I'm going to run through my presentation and James's, and then James will be the one who will be running and moderating the discussion that follows afterwards, which actually is going to work out for the best because of the two of us, the one who knows by far the most about micro-credentialing programs and the kinds of initiatives that are emerging in the province, and especially with what Bow Valley is doing through Pivot Ed. This group will be in more than capable hands with him.
You're very kind.
And so because of that, James is going to be running my slides for me, and so I have to interrupt every now and then by asking him to move on to the next one, like right now, please, if you wouldn't mind. So by way of just quick opening context about the Business Council of Alberta, we're a relatively new organization. We've been around for about 1.5 years, and we're a policy and advocacy group that represents Alberta's largest and most dynamic businesses. And so what we do is, all the work that we do is in the framework of creating prosperity for Albertans. And so we do that through 2 major pillars of work. The first one is on jobs and opportunity, and the second is sustainable economic development. And the sustainable economic development is really our long-term view on issues that matter to Albertans and to Canadians. And in there, we're doing work in areas like climate change and energy policy, and technology and innovation, and Alberta's fiscal model. And then on the jobs and opportunity side, we're really focused on this education and skills issue, and creating a more vibrant and dynamic and adaptable workforce in Alberta. And so this was actually the very first work that we did as a business organization. We started this about last year. Actually, James, can you move on to the next slide, please? We do our work through our major policy work through a task force model, where what we do is we'll get together a number of CEOs and their major organizations from their representatives from across our membership base, and our members include, like as I said, all these large and dynamic businesses in Alberta, and so they're widely representative of the businesses that you can think of in the province. And so that includes the energy sector, obviously, but also construction, residential and commercial real estate, telecommunications, aviation, financial services, agriculture, forestry. We cover the broad range of businesses, and so we had representatives from most of those industry groups within this task force. And what we began doing this work, is our first policy work. It began in October or so of last year. And we really wanted to look as the first major initiative of the Business Council of Alberta on what we can do to improve labor market prospects in the province. And so at that time, it was a very different situation from our current COVID one, where we're all trying to figure out how Zoom meetings and conferences still work. And at that time, we had 2 major concerns as an organization. And the one was that technological change was impacting the useful life of skills. And so we were entering an era where people would constantly need to be trained and retrained, both for their own personal professional growth, as well as to adapt to the changing needs of the workplace for businesses. And so in that context, we had the second reason why we wanted to do this was because the Alberta economy, or the context rather, was that the Alberta economy, even at that time, was struggling. Since the 2014-2015 oil price crash, we had seen flat economic growth. Job prospects in the province had been lagging compared to other provinces in Canada. And so we were looking at this work as an opportunity to create the workforce that we need in order to advance economic growth, to attract investment into Alberta, and to create opportunities for Albertans who are struggling to find work. And in that context, in that slower economic growth, we were still hearing reports from our businesses that they were having difficulty finding the skills that they need. And the most common area where that was the case was in technology, was in technical skills, in digital skills, in information technologies, and so on. But there was also a large and emerging consensus within the group and the business community in general that it's not just about technical skills, but it is also looking at some of the soft skills that people need to have in order to be able to function well in a work environment. And so that's, things like cognitive thinking, even things that are simple, like working well with others in an office, how to, strategic thinking, and also that entire range of soft skills were areas where people realize that as technology changes, the value that people bring to the workforce was really focused on those creative components. And so that was all the motivation for this group to get together to create this resilient and adaptable workforce, and as well to keep the best and the brightest Albertans in the province and to attract those from around the world to come live and work here. And so we move on to the next slide, please. So we had, and so all of this culminated in our report, Skilled by Design, which we released in June of last year. Our release of it was delayed slightly because the COVID economic shutdown both impeded our ability to work on the project and also changed some of the focus of it, because we were no longer talking about recovering from a flat base of economic growth, but also looking at how do we accelerate the recovery out of the COVID situation. And so this report is available on our website for anybody who's interested. It has three main focus areas. The first is really a reputation piece on building a better Alberta, and that's about immediate jobs and skills retraining for unemployed Albertans post-COVID. And it's about the reputation that Alberta has that we struggle with, whether accurate or inaccurate, on things like whether we are an open and inclusive province, the perception that Alberta is an energy-dominated province in an era where we're pivoting towards low-emission fuels, whether or not Alberta has the same kind of a bright economic future as we had in the past. And so what can we do about those issues in terms of welcoming boldness and collaboration and innovation, and bringing people to Alberta to help solve the world's biggest problems because of the knowledge and expertise and ingenuity that Albertans have. And the other two components, a culture of lifelong learning and experience-based training, are really the meat of the matter in this, in terms of practical applications of where our task force and the business community wanted to go. And the culture of lifelong learning is about this micro-credentialing component. It's about providing an enabling environment for continuous improvement based on what I said before about the need to continually reskill and upskill as technology changes and the demands of the workforce changes, and to allow Albertans to be able to be more resilient in the face of those changes. And the experience-based training component, the third one, is really about providing work experience as part of the education curriculum. And so we're looking at a number of work integrated learning initiatives that we want to adapt with that. So move on to the next slide, please. So because we've been, since this report was released, we've received a lot of feedback and a lot of interest from post-secondary institutions across the province, and as well as from the provincial government itself, about what businesses are looking for. And it is these things that I've touched on these already a little bit, that the goal of this and the goal of these micro-credentialing programs is that our members really see this and see that kind of a model of education as being a way that we can quickly upskill people so that they don't have to go back to a university or to a technical school to get a 2-year or 4-year diploma, we can break some of these programs down, as I'm sure James is going to talk about in a couple of minutes, into smaller bite-sized chunks to create opportunities for people and businesses to be trained in just those single isolated specific skills that they need, and then they can build upon those, like in a Lego brick kind of a model, to either build towards a larger, more formal degree, or to create a unique suite of skills that are needed and can be quickly updated and adapted as time needs. So move on, please. So what we did with our work is there are a number of recommendations in there, and I don't want to go through all of them, but I just want to give you some sense of what the key ones and the main focus areas are. And so we're right now at, as I mentioned, at the implementation stage of this report. We've the provincial government has been very interested in pursuing this. We've had extended conversations with James and with Nate and the universities and SAIT about how we can advance this kind of work. And what we see, and this is straight from the business community perspective and not necessarily from post-secondary institutions themselves, is focusing on three main areas, the three steps in recommendations. The first is, when we think about these micro-credentialing programs, a number of institutions are creating them, and there are a lot out there. And sometimes one of the issues that businesses have when they're looking at the kinds of training programs that are available is that there are so many of them, and that they overlap to some degree from one institution to the next, and they may not be transferable from one institution to the next. Is the first step towards implementing more of these kinds of programs and having them be more prevalent is just to have more information about what exactly is even out there. So this is our first priority recommendation area, is working with the province to catalog, harmonize, and consolidate some of these programs. Not consolidate in the sense that each institution has to provide the exact same thing, but what we need is, if we're going to create a program where we're micro-credentialing and testing for a specific skill or competency in an area, which is how these programs work, is that we need some general understanding of what those skills and competencies actually are. So what is it that we're testing for? What is it that we want to be able to do at the end of the program? And how do we make sure that, how do we demonstrate that the person who's taking those courses or those credentials actually has the skills that are needed? And that's important for, to be able to not only provide these programs, but to create an understanding about what it is that, from an employer perspective, what it is that the person you're looking at and hiring can do. And a critical component of that also has to be that these need to be widely recognized, because if a post-secondary institution creates a micro-credential in, let's say, a basic accounting kind of a field, if people don't know what that is, then they're not going to know what it looks like. They're not going to know what it means when they see it on a resume. And so we wanted to, these skills, these programs need to be widely acknowledged. They need to be transferable. They need to be recognized, and they need to be respected. And so that's one of the big hurdles that we see, and not because of any shortcomings of the post-secondary institutions themselves, but just because this is a new way of looking at education, or it's an evolving way of looking at education, and so there's some adapting that's needed there. The second stage in our key recommendations is to expand. So first, we want to consolidate, harmonize, identify what it is we're testing for, and how to define and sort of put a box around the skills that are needed. And then after that, we're looking at expanding the number and range of these programs. And so we're actually actively involved with James and a panel of business leaders to talk to the provincial government and to one another about trying to take the next step in that area, trying to identify which skills and competencies are most in demand, where Albertans want to be trained, where businesses are looking for training for people, trying to, as I said before, put a box around some of those skills, and take the next step towards developing pilot projects. And so we're actually starting that work right away. In the next few weeks or a month or so, we'll begin meeting with a group of businesses and post-secondary institutions to start doing that. And the third thing that we liked, and this is one of the biggest features for my mind, as the author of this report, of where micro-credentialing can go. And this is an area where I learned this from James and from Pivot Ed at Bow Valley College, actually, is one of the big innovations that could come out of this kind of micro-credentialing system of training and education, is the recognition that you don't necessarily have to go to school to acquire the skills that are needed. I mean, you can think of any particular example that you want. I mean, if there are any musicians who are listening here, if you learn to play the guitar, if you learn by yourself, either through watching YouTube videos or just fooling around or reading books, you know, you couldn't go to classes, you can take music lessons, or you can do this kind of thing yourself. And if you can demonstrate that you can actually play the guitar to some standard, there's no point in needing to actually take the course in order to get the micro-credential, because you already know how to do it. And this is a common feature of a lot of education and training programs right now. In fact, if anybody here has recently been or knows any students, I mean, how often do you find cases where students will take a course where they know perfectly well how to do the thing? It just happens to be a prerequisite to advance further, and they have no option to not take it, so they have to jump through all the hoops needed in order to advance their education. And this kind of a program in the system, through Pivot Ed, which I'm sure James will talk about a bit more in a second, will allow students to be able to take the test, and if you fail the test, then you know you need to take the course. Or even if there are various components within the course, if let's say there are 10 things that you need to pass in order to create, to get your micro-credential, and you've demonstrated your competency at 8 of those 10, then you'll only need to be trained on the remaining 2. And so we see some significant opportunities to speed up and democratize the education process through these kinds of initiatives, and create a much more efficient and responsive system. So I'll stop there. And so that just what I wanted to do with this was just kind of give you a frame of where the Business Council of Alberta, how we are looking at some of these issues, and how we're going to be working with the province and with post-secondary institutions on these things. As I said at the beginning, I apologize a second time because of a conflict that I had. I'm not going to be able to stay on for too much longer to talk or post James's part of this presentation before we get to the questions. But at the very end of the slide presentation, once James is finished, there's contact information for both of us. And so if anyone has any questions or issues or concerns or feedback on the work that the Business Council is doing in this area, I am actively encourage anyone to reach out to me through my email address that's there, and let me know what you're thinking, and I'll get back to you on those as soon as I can. So with that, I thank everybody for your time and patience, and pass it over to James.
Thanks, Mike. So Pivot Ed, I think the easiest way to really bridge the gap, if you will, between what Mike talked about and Pivot Ed, I think if the Business Council of Alberta is creating the ecosystem, serving as an advocate, championing the need to upskill and reskill, especially through micro-credentials, Pivot Ed is one of the organizations that's actually out there doing it. So in that way, they're very, very complementary. Number one. So what exactly is Pivot Ed? You know, at a grand level, we're a Bow Valley College venture that addresses the skills gap. And I think the use of the phrase Bow Valley College venture is really important. Bow Valley College, because of all the academic rigor and the process and the institutional strengths we bring to the table, but venture because we're highly client and outcome focused. And I've heard Pivot Ed being described as a startup inside Bow Valley College. And we're client and outcome focused. And to Mike's points about this has to be focused on industry and what industry needs. This has to focus on ensuring that individuals like you and I can really demonstrate what exactly we can do for a particular job. That's what we're trying to do. This isn't something Bow Valley College came up with overnight. It builds on our track record with assessments and with micro-credentials. And really what we do at the end of the day, we're using artificial intelligence to create assessments that assess a person's competencies for a particular job. Once I take that assessment, the result I get is you demonstrate all the competencies or you don't demonstrate all the competencies. And again, to build on what Mike said, let's say I demonstrate 8 and I don't demonstrate 2. We can recommend learning only for the 2, not for the total of 10. Then we go back and take the assessment and we receive a micro-credential that can be presented to employers. A couple of things here. I beg your pardon, a couple of things here. Employers recognize this micro-credential because we work with them to create it in the first place. We start off by saying, what is the job that you need done? And what does success in that job look like? So when we actually create a competency profile for a particular job, it starts with employer feedback and employer inputs. Therefore, when you actually receive a micro-credential to say you demonstrate the 10 competencies, and I come to you as an employer and I present it, you're in a position to say, I know exactly what James is bringing to the table, because after all, my organization helped write the competencies for success in that job. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing. So how does this help? We really have a value proposition for individuals. We also have a separate value proposition for employers. Individuals is really straightforward. If I am unemployed and I can take an assessment and receive a micro-credential, it can help me find employment. I can go to an employer and say, here's my badge. These are the competencies I have for a particular role. If I'm already employed, it can help me progress from one role to another. If I'm in one sector and I wish to take my skills to another sector, it can help me transition. And last but in no way, shape or form the least, it can also help me retool my skills in my existing career. The world is changing rapidly. Expectations in my role are changing rapidly. It helps me retool. So let's just take one example of this. Let's take the transition to a new career piece, because that's particularly relevant here in Calgary today, in the province today. Let's say I work for an energy company, I'm an engineer, or I'm a geologist. But let's also say that I, for the last 20 years, have been a weekend coder. You know, I know how to code, I know how to develop. It's something that started off as a hobby, it's become a passion, and I'm really good at it. Today, if I actually apply for a job as a developer at a rapidly growing tech startup in Calgary, and I'm purposefully choosing the energy sector and the transition to tech as an example, chances are that I won't get very far for the simple reason that I'll be seen as a geologist. I'll be seen as someone coming from an energy company. Taking the assessment for cloud computing, for example, receiving the badge and being able to present that to a startup that helped Pivothead create that assessment in the first place vastly increases my chances of being able to transition from energy to the tech sector. That's just one use case, but there are many more examples we can talk about. The other thing about assessments is Pivothead at the moment is working with soft skills like customer service. We're working with leadership skills. We're also working with technical skills. So the concept of an AI assessment can be applied to any field and any kind of assessment. It's any kind of role. It's not limited to to soft or to technical skills. Now, when you shift the needle to employers, how does it add value to them? Number one, they can focus only on the required skills. I'm hiring for role X. Role X requires 10 competencies. The assessment says that James has those 10 competencies or tests those 10 competencies. Because they're focusing only on the required skills, they can hire faster and onboard faster. They can become more objective when they're hiring because once again, they're focusing on the job to be done and they're removing biases attached to where I currently work, whether I'm currently unemployed, what my graduate degree is or isn't, and so on. And last but not the least, because you're hiring fit for role, you're lowering the cost of a bad hire. And data shows that the cost of a bad hire is vastly in excess of the money spent to actually bring someone on board in the first place. So how do micro-credentials actually help? I think it's important to point out that a micro-credential is an artifact. It's a badge. It can be a badge. It's a physical artifact that really demonstrates that I know something and that I can do something. But it helps because first and foremost, it's driven by employer need. So when you look at Pivothead, we don't say, let's create a micro-credential on cloud computing. What we first say is, what are key employers in Calgary or in Alberta looking for? What are the roles they're looking to fill? So it's driven by employer need. Like I said, the competencies we're assessing are pre-validated by these industry partners. Just yesterday, we were in a series of conversations to create a particular micro-credential, an assessment and a micro-credential, where we actually had representatives both from a leading energy company as well as a couple of rapidly growing tech companies that really helped us understand what competencies they require. When I have because we use an AI, we use the IBM Watson stack, because we use Watson to test competencies, we're able to tangibly help people demonstrate exactly what they bring to the table. Okay, and the more and more you run an assessment, the better its effectiveness becomes, because AI improves with age, if you will. You can attain this without a huge investment of time and money. To Mike's point, this is not a 4-year degree or anything of that sort. This can be something as short as a 3-hour micro-credential, a 3-hour assessment, or slightly longer. So you're looking at 10 to 12 hours if it's highly technical. Learning, if therefore, low investment of time and money. Learning is limited to the competencies that are required. 10 are required. I have 9. I'm only focusing on the last one. And that particular learning, so Bow Valley College, we talk about all learning count, making all learning count. That 10th competency doesn't even have to be from Bow Valley College. If you want to go teach yourself on YouTube, you can do that. So it's highly attuned to your needs and your personal situation and circumstances. It's rapid response. Workplace is changing rapidly. In the last 9 months, we all know how rapidly it's changed. Micro-credentials really allow you to change, your skill set to match the requirements of your employer or a new employer rapidly. And like I said, we're really spotlighting the competencies you bring to the table. We're not fussed about a micro-credential ensures that people are not fussed about your background, your education, your work experience, or anything of that sort. So how are we really building this? We talked about this at the Government of Canada, Employment Skills Development Canada, and we recently received a $1.5 million investment from the Future Skills Centre. It's a 2-year program, and what we've really done is created a pan-Canadian ecosystem of 11 or 12 academic, public, and private partners. And we're not just creating the backbone of a business, but we're also actually creating assessments that we will deliver through a tech platform. 6 different provinces, we're mapping out 6 different provinces plus Alberta, of course, and we're mapping out what 14 in-demand jobs across Canada look like. We're also building a tech platform to load these assessments on so that anyone in Canada, starting with Calgary, moving to Alberta, moving outwards to other provinces, anyone in Canada can log on to this system, choose from one of the assessments on offer, click Start an Assessment. They can actually take the assessment, receive a micro-credential, and then present that to employers in their respective provinces or anywhere for that matter. So Bow Valley College is starting off with 2 assessments on cloud computing and data analytics. We've already got some offerings related to business intelligence, customer service, leadership development. So we ourselves have a library of 5. And very soon this will go up to 20 or 25 of these. And I think it's very, very interesting that we've been able to use this investment to really build this marketplace, Amazon marketplace of sorts, because at the end of the day, you can have a great idea, but ideas are not worth much unless you can find a way to actually get them into the hands of people who need them. So what we hope we're doing is really creating this platform that will allow anyone to log on, take an assessment, connect directly with employers, present the micro-credential, and then get employed on the basis of that. So anyway, last but not the least, we're leveling the playing field. We're meeting the needs of a rapidly changing workforce. Through all this, we're driving economic and social prosperity in the province. And like I said, we're fulfilling the college's vision to make all learning count. So that was the last slide. Contact details for Mike and myself. And I guess we can now open it up to questions.
Hey, James, thanks very much for that. There's a question there. Jessica, do you want to parse out your question? Maybe just share portions of it?
For sure. And Mike actually had sent me a note back to give some clarity on it. But one of the things I was curious about in the work that you guys have been doing and when you've been reaching out to different business members in the community and leaders is what's the general perception from leaders broadly around micro-credentialing? I know there's a number of different online resources, particularly Coursera is one that I've explored before, LinkedIn Learning, and I know there's a number of other ones out there. But one of the things that always kind of rolls around in the back of my mind when I'm either considering it for myself or recommending it to colleagues or team members is this going to really just support my own personal development, or is it going to carry some weight within the business community as well? So I'm curious, in this engagement, I know this is very much targeted, but kind of generally speaking, is the perception shifting that these are acceptable means of training, or are they still really looking for that, institutional backed, like through the U Calgary example, or for example, type of training programs?
No, I think that's a great question, Jessica. Thank you. First and foremost, I think thinking has changed dramatically over the last 9 months. And I think no small part to work that the Business Council of Alberta has done, as well as understanding in the business world that they have specific gaps. There are people that are looking for employment. There needs to be a way to really bridge that gap. And I think there is an understanding that micro-credentials do help, number one. Number two, this is a generalization, but it's important to consider what kind of organizations it can help. Small and medium organizations, entrepreneurial organizations, the tech sector, very, very open. Large traditional organizations, I think there probably is a little bit way to go. Third level down, important to clarify that micro-credentials can be stacked. So instead of doing a 4-year degree, you could, and I'm just making numbers up, don't hold me to this, you could potentially do, 30 micro-credentials over 4 years, all of which stack to give you the equivalent, I beg your pardon, of a diploma or a degree. But I think most importantly, there is a growing understanding that when you have a job to be filled, given the way the world is going, what you really need to do is focus on exactly what needs to be done. And I think the ecosystem, the groundswell of opinion change that the Business Council of Alberta has created has helped in a huge way. And then you've got someone like Pivot Ed stepping in to say, so what is that job you need filled? What are the competencies required? If we can actually create an AI assessment that tests those competencies and present 20 people with those badges to you, would you be interested in speaking to them? And I think what we're hearing from industry partners, both big and small, is absolutely, because we're very focused on getting people to fill those roles and do that, and really cutting away the clutter around a normal application. So I think to answer your question more directly, I think opinion is changing in a big way. Organizations like the BCA and Pivot Ed are stepping in really to make the thinking real. And I think at the end of the day, the more people that we can actually help get hired, the faster opinion will change and the more open industry will become to the whole thing. Did that help?
Yes, no, that helps a lot. Thanks. And it ties into a conversation I was having with our director of innovation the other day. We're at a larger midstream company and
Sure.
talking about needing to reskill the existing workforce even within the company, so that you're not looking to have to go external. So I think things like that, this presents a fantastic opportunity for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not, and micro-credentials, if you remember the value prop slide, it can start with me as an individual helping me find work. It can also start with you as an employer that says, look, we need to make sure that we can upskill a whole group of people to a particular skill set. We need to make sure that we can hire people who can do exactly this job. So, there are many use cases, and those are the things we're figuring out through conversations like this. So happy to reconnect with you, post the session and have a more detailed discussion on this.
Yeah, no, that would be fantastic. I think there's a connection that we can make internal to our company that may be beneficial.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Is there anyone other questions? I've got a question from Colin that Colin had to leave, but is there any other one else who has a question? Okay, so Colin's question, James, was, I love micro-credentialing as someone who loves learning, but can't sit through classes towards more formalized education. How is entrepreneurship viewed in this space?
Would you mind repeating the question, Randy? I'm not sure I understood it properly.
It's in the chat. Do you have access to the chat there, James?
I should. Okay.
And if you scroll up to Colin's question.
There you go. I love micro-credentialing. Got it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. So I think there are two parts. I love micro-credentialing as someone who loves learning, but can't sit through classes towards more formalized education. So there, Colin's hit the nail right on the head. It's really about just-in-time learning for what you don't know. We assume when you take the assessment that you're bringing a certain level of understanding through to the whole thing. How is entrepreneurship viewed in this space? That's the bit I'm having trouble understanding. I'm not sure what he means by how is entrepreneurship viewed in this space. But let me take a stab, and maybe I'm completely misunderstanding this. Even if you look at entrepreneurship or an entrepreneur inside an organization, I'm not sure if he means that's the job role to be fulfilled, but every single conversation around micro-credentialing starts with, Randy, what is the job that you need to hire for? What is the job that you want people to be able to do? If you don't start with that, you really can't break the job down into competencies. You can't get people to sign off on, yes, that's what someone who's effective at this role or who's an expert at this role can actually do. And if you can't arrive at those competencies, you can't really create a robust AI assessment. So it's really a progression. So if Colin is talking about entrepreneurship, a micro-credential around entrepreneurship, and I'm not sure, like I said, if that's what he meant, you really have to start with, what does an entrepreneur do inside my organization? What are the technical skills, the soft skills, the other skills that they need to have? How do we map that out and validate that that's what success looks like in this role? And then you move forward to creating a competency profile that breaks those down. Then an assessment that tests exactly those competencies. But I have a funny feeling that that's not what he meant. But I'm an entrepreneur inside Bow Valley College. Pivoted is a startup inside the college. So I'm an entrepreneur inside Bow Valley College at the moment. So, and I have a funny feeling that I'm really not answering this because I haven't understood it the right way.
I think what Colin's, that's part of what you addressed there. I think also what he's addressing there too is, as an individual, say within a company, wants to grow and develop and seek out new opportunities to be able to help the company grow in many ways, how do they develop those necessary skill sets to be able to thrive within the organization? You think of, let's say, Google and other companies, sort of 20% time that they allow for growing. In that same sense, in terms of creating, let's say, skunk works, as they referred to them before, in terms of these sort of innovative projects, how do we help employers, let's say, and in some ways this goes back to the other session we have on corporate reskilling. But let's say, even from an individual perspective, how does an individual develop and grow their skill sets to be able to thrive?
Yes. So I think it's important to clarify that a micro-credential is not a silver bullet for absolutely everything. The purpose a micro-credential serves is demonstrate very, very clearly what I bring to the table for a particular role. Whether I'm looking, whether I'm already there, it doesn't matter. So I think, against the context of what you said, let's say I work for company X and company X is investing a lot in a particular area. Let's say, I don't know, let's just make stuff up, machine learning, for example. A micro-credential is a very effective way for me to go out into the market and say, I know machine learning well, how do I demonstrate it? To actually identify a micro-credential out there, it could be from PivotEd, it could be from somewhere else, but actually identify a micro-credential, understand the competencies it'll help me demonstrate, match it to whether that's exactly what my organization needs to see, take the assessment. If I don't have all the competencies, go develop the learning, receive the badge, then go back to my employer and say, look, I know the organization is spending a lot of time and effort on machine learning. Here's a badge that I've gotten for myself on my own time, really to show that I can play a role in this journey. Okay, these are the competencies it assesses. These are the competencies I bring to the table. Here's an opportunity for me to really play a role in this journey that adds value, not just to my company and its clients, but also to my own career. That's the way I would approach it. But important to keep in mind that a micro-credential itself is merely an artifact that demonstrates the competencies you have. You have to match it to a role. Otherwise, it becomes a standalone conversation without a root of sorts.
Right, yeah. Are there any other questions out there? Thanks, James. I'm wondering, how do we broaden? You said you're meeting with industries right now, industry representatives right now. I think one of the things maybe is to really expand companies' usage of, let's say, micro-credentialing.
Yeah. So we're doing two or three things, Randy. Number one, we're building. So first and foremost, you can have all the assessments in the world. You really need a robust platform to offer it to people. So again, think Amazon. Amazon's Amazon because you can log on to Amazon.ca and buy pretty much anything under the sun there. Think how effective Amazon would be if they didn't actually have that website. So we're creating a platform which will really be the repository for all these assessments. You need easy availability. If you don't have access, the whole thing falls flat. So that's one thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is actively engaging industry, us directly here in the province and through our academic partners in other provinces, all the way out to Quebec, New Brunswick on one side and to BC on the other side. And we're saying, what are those key areas where you're struggling to find talent? What are those key areas that your organization is going to get into where you feel you'd like people internally to transition to, but they don't have the skills? So that industry engagement piece is very, very important. So we're actively doing that. So like I said, we're creating some assessments on cloud computing, data analytics, and business intelligence. But we have academic partners who are talking about design and media, transport and logistics, health, education, and a whole variety of fields. So that's the second thing. You've got the platform. Now you really need to engage industry partners, and these partners can be small, medium, and large. And you need to create this huge library of assessments. It's like going to your local library. If all they have is 3 books, you wouldn't go there. It's about variety. That's the second thing.
Yeah.
The third thing is actually being able to get assessments into the hands of people. Okay. And if you have understood the right demand, and if you've got a way to deliver it through a platform or some kind of marketplace, then it's really communicating the fact that you have this. So that's really the ecosystem, Randy, that we're doing. We're building a bank of assessments, we're engaging industry, we're creating awareness, and we have a platform to deliver it. This is very new. You and I engaged when I was in my previous role. I actually complete 1 year at Bow Valley College next month. So this is 11 months into this journey now. So I think in the next 3 to 6 months, you'll see a lot more activity around this. But I think it's a combination of things that builds the brand here.
I think in many ways too, I think thinking as a professor at a post-secondary, I think it's also, we've got other professors from, let's say, Mount Royal, yes, or from the University of Calgary. And again, building on this, and the PSI is working together in essence to help facilitate this kind of this new way of education, perhaps that's goes beyond sort of that complements the traditional education process. Great. Well, thank you so much, James. Really appreciate yours and Mike's contribution today, and also thank all the participants for joining us. If you look into the Zoom, the chat, you have the links there to the other breakout sessions. The session will end in about a minute or so. We'll have a break for about 5 minutes, and then starting at 11:25, we have breakout session D on mentorship and emerging leadership. You see the Zoom link there. We have on breakout session E, building adaptive and resilient cities. And then finally, breakout session F, session on the gig economy, thriving and surviving through uncertainty. So thanks everyone for participating. I'm going to be ending this session now, and look forward to seeing you in some of the future sessions.
Thank you all.
Great, thanks, James.